Hello and welcome back to Reading Tintin, a personal view, in which I go through all 24 volumes of the Tintin series and give my own thoughts, my own reflections on reading them as a kid, and a little bit of historical context here and there. We're at the 8th adventure in the series, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We don't have Soviets there, so King Ottokar's Sceptre would have been the 8th volume that Hergé produced in the series. And before we go on, just a quick note to say that if you're watching and you like Hergé, or you like comics, or you like Tintin, or even if you just happen to find it interesting, please consider hitting the like button or the subscribe button. And I am, as I said, I'm doing all 24 of these, so I'll be releasing these videos regularly. And I'm a cartoonist myself. And if you're interested in what I do, other videos that I produce, artwork that I put up, please consider becoming a member of my Patreon site. It's patreon.com, Sean and Kiara. And we are the co-creators of a graphic novel, Lucy in the Sky. Came out a few years back from First Second, and we are just finishing up our second one, Rhiannon, which is forthcoming also from First Second. So please check us out. So, King Ottokar's Sceptre. So this was one of the early adventures that were done in black and white, first serialized and then collected into book form in the original black and white version, and then some years later were reworked into a color version. And of the early adventures, so those I count up to what will be our next one that we'll take a look at, The Crab with the Golden Claws. Up to that point, after Crab with the Golden Claws, starting with the Shooting Star, Hergé began doing them in color, so there was no need to rework black and white versions after that. So this was one of the last of those early adventures that he did in black and white first, and then had to make some alterations in color. Now, some of those early books, for instance, the Broken Ear, when they went to do it in color, when they went to redo it in color, that one, for instance, there wasn't a whole lot redrawn in that book. Almost nothing in that was redrawn. There might have been a little bit of reformatting. He had to resize some panels, fit them into a new format of 4 tiers of panels per page rather than the 3 tiers that he did in the black and whites. But if you compare the Broken Ear, the color, to the black and white, it looks pretty much the same. Some of them had very little alterations. Some of them were completely redrawn. So the very early ones, Tintin in the Congo, Tintin in America, the Soviets was never redrawn at all. The only way you can get that is in a facsimile edition of the black and white, but those first few were completely redrawn. And there were a few, such as the Cigars of the Pharaoh, were completely redrawn much later. Now, the thing about Cigars is when they went to redraw it, they made an effort to sort of keep the period details. So, for instance, they didn't update the look of the trains. They kept the vehicles and the costumes and so forth true to the time that it was originally released, which would have been the 1930s. Even Tintin's outfit here is his older yellow button-down shirt rather than the later blue sweater that he would wear in the later adventures. So they really made a point of, kind of maintaining this look of having it set in the time that it was originally released. When they went to redraw the Black Island, this was redrawn much, much later. As I mentioned in the last episode, there was a color version and then a second color version, which was completely redrawn in 1966, and this was for the British market, especially. The British publisher felt that it just looked too outdated and it needed to be completely reworked. And so that when they went to redraw this volume, they made everything in here looks very 1966 rather than the late 1930s. The cars, he's got his later outfit on, the blue pullover. The planes, you know, there's even a guy here with blue jeans. And it looks much more modern. So the effect that has when you read them straight through, you're reading them and they all have a certain look, you know, and then you get to the Black Island and all of a sudden everything looks a lot more modern. And then you go back to the King Ottokar's Sceptre and we're back in the 1930s again. So it's a little disorienting if you read it that way. That it has there's like an anachronistic feel to it if you're trying to read them in sequence, and think that these stories take place in a certain chronology. So that's one effect of having redrawn some of these at a much later date. And then some of them that were redrawn, for instance, the Blue Lotus, kept pretty much to the look of the black and white version. The figures, not a lot of redrawing there, but more background detail was added. And this is also the case with King Ottokar's Sceptre. So the black and white version of this was published in 1939, and the color version came out in 1947. And when they put out the color version, a lot was added to costumes and background. We'll see a lot more background detail, and this was partly due to one of Hergé's collaborators. We'll talk about in a few moments. All right, so my copy of King Ottokar's Sceptre is. We look down at the bottom here. The publisher is Magnet. And as I was going through my copies, I was trying to remember when I got them. Was I a kid? Did I get them in the States? Did I get them in Canada when I was visiting my Canadian relatives? I think this must be one of the ones that I bought as a kid on one of our family trips to Canada to visit our relatives up there. Because Magnet, I believe, was a Canadian publisher. The publisher in the States was Little Brown. And if you look at the back, actually all the titles on the back, if you kind of look in real close, they all say Methuen. Methuen was not only the British publisher of the Tintin adventures, now they're published by Egmont, but at that time it was Methuen. It was the original English language British publisher. And they also published them in Canada. Now, for some reason, there must have been some sort of, I don't know if they acquired Magnet at some point, and Magnet was the imprint that they were putting on them at that time. I think I have some that say Methuen as well, but this is definitely would have been a Canadian printing. So let's look at it. So as I said, when this was redone in color, one of Hergé's collaborators at the time was Edgar P. Jacobs, and he went on to do a series of his own called Blake and Mortimer, which is really good, and is still ongoing. It's done by other people now. He's no longer alive, but he was one of Hergé's earlier collaborators, and he was a big opera enthusiast. And probably because of that, he was very much into costumery and backgrounds. I'm thinking like stage scenery would have, really appealed to him. And so he really wanted to get things accurate so far as costume and background details and so forth. And one of the things that he apparently was responsible for when they went to redraw some of this in color was the guards outside of this fortress where they keep the crown jewels. In the original black and white version, these guys have uniforms that look a lot like the British Beefeater uniform from the Tower of London. And this whole thing here has kind of like a Tower of London feel to it. And Jacobs changed them to a more Balkan-looking uniform. So so as I said, this was originally serialized in the late 30s. It was collected in 1939, and following on the Black Island, and I mentioned in the last episode on the Black Island how things that were going on in the world, World War II was approaching. Germany was being very aggressive. There was, the story in Black Island is there's a sort of a fifth column of German agents who are running a counterfeit ring, and they're trying to undermine the British economy, and doesn't really, make a whole lot of sense when you set it in 1966, but when you consider that originally it was set in 1937, I believe, then it kind of makes sense in the context of what was going on in the world at the time. And this one, this story takes place in a fictional country called Sildavia, and it is about an attempted invasion of Sildavia by its neighbor Borduria. And Borduria is clearly an analog with Germany. Sildavia and Borduria were two of the fictional countries that Hergé created. He created a number of fictional nations in his series. San Theodorus and the Broken Ear was one of them. And these two sort of neighbors and rival countries pop up again. We'll see them again in the Calculus Affair, and they'll even come back in connection with San Theodorus in the Picaros, the last adventure. And as I said, Borduria is seen as analogous to Nazi Germany, and even the leader of Borduria in the adventure, his name is Musler, and it's clearly a combination of Hitler and Mussolini. So there are a number of clues which make it quite clear that Hergé had in mind Nazi Germany. He was modeling Borduria after. And a lot of people say that Sildavia was modeled on Albania, although we'll see the fictional Sildavian language that he creates in here looks, more like Polish. So it's probably a combination of different Eastern European nations. Sildavia is set in the Balkans. So right here is an interesting panel, this sort of split. Hergé doesn't really do this a lot, where he'll stick to the 4-tier grid, and the panels usually don't get much smaller than that. I mean, they're pretty small. They work because of this larger format, but here he splits the panel further, and he does it to show the 2 floors of the building, which is kind of interesting. I think it's the only time I've seen him do that. And like Broken Ear, the adventure starts off in Brussels, Tintin's hometown, and we get a glimpse of his flat, like we did in that volume. On the check, so he's in the Sildavian restaurant, and on the check it gives the address to the restaurant, and the address is 38 Nightingale Road. This was changed from a French street name in the original French language version. And I've said before about how the English language version sort of leads you to think that Tintin is his home base is England rather than Brussels, and this is a little clue to that, but there's really not much more of that kind of thing in this volume. And here we see we get another look at his flat on Labrador Road, is where his flat is set, both in the French and the English language versions, actually. And we see his big red chair, which makes an appearance in a few of the volumes. There's a little mantle clock. I think that comes up in another volume as well. At some point, I tried to gather all the volumes that show the inside of his flat, and to see if there were any consistencies. And the red chair does pop up a few times. I think the clock does as well. And here we have the Thompsons come in, and right off the bat with their physical humor, a little joke here. This is sort of early in their relationship with Tintin. And so far they've kind of had this, they're friends, but the moment they think that Tintin is involved with the villains, they're ready to grab him. And this kind of happens here as well. But they're walking up to the flat here, and they say, he said his door would always be open to us, kind of to suggest that their friendship is in the early phases. And right as they get to the door, of course, he kicks the door shut right in their face. Sort of a classic Thompson and Thompson gag. We'll see a lot of their little gags, the physical humor in this one. And again, they see there's a body here and evidence of a struggle, and they're ready to nab him. Their allegiance to him changes so quickly. Here we see Tintin's landlady. She appears in a few of the volumes, and the Thompsons are visiting, and they take a parcel that's been delivered for Tintin. They take it up to his flat to take a look at it, and while they're there, the parcel explodes. It was a bomb meant for Tintin, and of course they're left with their collars unbuttoned and their pant legs in shreds. So here's this is a page. If you look at it in the black and white, let me see some comparisons here. Yeah, especially this one here where they're on the bike. It's just a blank background in the original, and here they went and they drew in the city. This whole page, there was a lot of background added here to show the city, and we'll see more of that as we go on. This sort of reworking, adding more detail was really nice. This panel here is actually really nice with the horizon line with the perspective like right at the bottom of the panel there. Okay, so we got more more cars, and although it was drawn in the redrawn or redone for color in the late 40s, they're still staying with the 1930s style cars, which is good. And here we're at the airport, and the Thompsons, the propellers of the plane starts up, and their hats are blown off. And not only that, but their hats are run over by the oil truck. It's another repeating gag. They're having their hats blown off, their pratfalls falling on their face, and having their hats blown off and then mangled. Something that happens to them again and again. This is one of the things that I really thought was cool about this volume when I first read it. Tintin's in the plane en route to Sildavia, and he's reading a brochure on Sildavia, and it's just three pages, but it's really well done. Here we have the redrawn guard at the Royal Treasure House in Clove. Costume redone. Nice pictures there. Nice little write-up giving you the back history of Sildavia. Lots of information here that you don't have to get from the characters. You can just in the brochure. And in the original black and white, this page here was not included. This is an addition to the color. This is really, it's done in the style of like a Persian miniature. And it's just so cool the way they did that. And then this panel here is made to look like a medieval manuscript. So from this point, it's kind of, one sort of dilemma or chase after another. It's pretty fast-paced. Falling out of the plane. Luckily, he lands in a cart full of hay. Here we have a sample of the Sildavian language, and unlike in the Broken Year, where the Arambayas speak, if you try to read their language, it actually makes some sense. You can see what they're saying. It's kind of clever the way they did it. Here, that's not the case. This doesn't really. It just looks like you're reading an unfamiliar language, but it has kind of a Polish look to it, I guess. There's a funny sequence here where they're trying to ask this carriage driver who is giving Tintin a ride where Tintin is, and he has a stutter, so he's trying to tell them, but he can't get it out, and a car comes along, and so they run to hide as the car passes, and as the car passes, the driver is pointing frantically to the car, and he tells them, I was trying to tell you, the young foreigner, he was in that car that just passed. And indeed, he gets a ride from this car, and the person who gives him a ride is the opera singer Bianca Castafiore. This is her first appearance. One of the things about the Tintin adventures is there are not many female characters. She's really the only female character of any substance in the whole series, and she's not the most sympathetic character either. And she kind of has one gag that she does. She always sings this same song from the opera Faust. It's the Jewel song, and that's what she's famous for. And when she does, her voice usually shatters glass or does something like that. And here we see her, she's singing. All the animals along the road are running out of the way. They hear her voice from afar. and he's taking a look at the, he says, it's lucky the windows are strong. He's seeing the guarantee that they will not shatter. And when he's arrested by the police, he hears her again. She's coming over the radio. The police officer is listening to her perform. And now here's where, you know, Jacob's influence really comes through. If you look at this in the black and white, again, it's, let me see if I can find it. It's pretty much just a blank room. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, just walls, the little cabinet, some steps, the door. Here we see the older uniforms there, and no detail at all. And here they've put in these murals that looks very Eastern European, Byzantine. This looks like it's based on a Byzantine. I guess it would have been mosaics, right? So really nicely done. There's a few scenes in several of the volumes where Tintin is trying to escape from or hide from uniformed soldiers, and they go down a hill like this. There's a scene similar to this in The Broken Ear, and I think in The Calculus Affair there's also a scene, something about this slope with these kind of shaped rocks. I don't know what it is, but kind of appears a few times. Snowy's always on the lookout for a bone. I was always impressed when I was a kid. This is one of the things that impressed me about these books, the use of color for the nighttime scenes. I always thought they were so effective, and I really made a point of studying how he did the colors for his night scenes when I went to do my own comics. Here we have another scene with Castafiore performing for the king of Sildavia and his court. And Tintin breaks in, there's a scuffle. And here, in the corner here, we have, this is Hergé, and there's Edgar P. Jacobs. They drew themselves in there. It's a little cameo. They would do that from time to time. Yeah, lots of action. At this point, we're going to get into a chase which sort of lasts through the rest of the book, which Tintin he's trying to get back the scepter that's been stolen. If the king does not appear in public with the scepter, he has to abdicate. So there's a day coming up where he must appear with it, and Tintin has to find it and get it back before then. Of course, it's the Bordurians who have stolen it in an effort to try to force the king to abdicate, and then they would have their invasion, which they've already got planned. Another great pratfall with the Thompsons in here. He's saying that you should be able to throw the scepter through the bars in the window. He says, "Here, I'll show you," and he throws it, bong, it ricochets back on the other Thompson, damaging his hat as well. Okay, so now we're off in the chase. Now the Bordurians have it. Now Tintin has it. And the chase takes them across the frontier into Bordoria the next day. That's a great panel there. Nice landscape. He's at the Bordurian frontier post, and he's going to get back by stealing a Bordurian airplane. He finds an airfield, and he's going to get in one of these planes and fly back to Sildavia in time to deliver the scepter to the king. And these planes are, Hergé made a point of giving the Bordurians German planes. These are Messerschmitts. Again, to drive home the point that the Bordurians are supposed to be the Nazis. And, you know, I think this was, you know, Germany had just annexed Austria and part of Czechoslovakia, and they were, you know, they had their sights on Poland. The invasion of Poland would have happened in 1939, and that was the beginning of the war then, and this was all going on right as Tintin was drawing this adventure. And here we have Snowy comes through and brings the scepter in at the 11th hour. And here we have the King of Sildavia in his procession on St. Vladimir's Day, which is the occasion that he has to appear with the scepter. And the coach was modeled after the British monarch's coach that we see on TV whenever it's brought out for state occasions. And another great, this was a panel was completely redrawn. The one in the black and white was much more underwhelming than this. Nice sort of 1-point perspective there. And again, here there's Hergé, and there's Jacobs, and right back there, I believe, with the monocle, is, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember now, but I think that was Hergé's brother, who apparently was an influence on him in creating Tintin. And he does have that sort of round Tintin-like face. I think he was modeled, Tintin was modeled physically on him. I'll have to double check that. And there's the Thompsons are in the back of the crowd, hurrah, hurrah, and they snag the chandelier on their canes and bring it down. You got to have something like that. And then, of course, one last walking off the plane, splash right into the sea. Great ending. And that is King Ottokar's scepter. And next time, we'll take a look at the crab with the golden claws.